for cultivating progress across the South, for working to unconditionally improve the lives of all, and for the bold underwriting of every Gravy podcast. SFA thanks our visionary Louisville, Kentucky friends, Pam and Brooke Smith.
Fruitcake has a bad rep. It's the gift that's endlessly regifted, with a reputation for being almost inedible. But today, I'm making a very special fruitcake. The recipe was developed in 1968 by a team of people led by a woman named Mary Klicka. Mary was a scientist for a facility in Massachusetts called the Natick Laboratory Army Research Development and Engineering Center, or Natick for short. She was tasked with solving a very specific problem, a problem that no one had ever encountered in human history. This fruitcake was studied for years by a team of dedicated researchers. Their job? Provide a nutritionally complete emergency ration for astronauts.
You're listening to Gravy.
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 A production of the Southern Foodways Alliance, Gravy tells the stories of the changing American South. I'm Melissa Hall. And this episode of Gravy is brought to you by cake. Fruitcake, to be more precise. Pastry chef Bronwen Wyatt, who reports this episode, is passionate about two things: restoring fruitcake's good name and geeking out on the foodways of outer space. Prepare for liftoff, listeners, because in this episode of Gravy, we'll explore the problems of dining in microgravity. We'll talk to a NASA food scientist, we'll meet a curator at the Air and Space Museum, and we'll hang out with an astronaut. It's a lot about space. And I know, I promised cake. And together, we'll discover what the little-known history of NASA's fruitcake can tell us about the future of spaceship food. Bronwen Wyatt launches the story.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
America joined the space race with the Project Mercury program in 1958, which aimed to put an astronaut into Earth's orbit. Since then, each era of U.S. spaceflight is defined by unique missions, from Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, and Skylab in the 60s and 70s, to the Shuttle program, which began in 1981, and the establishment of the International Space Station, or ISS, in 1998. As of March 9, 2025, there are 7 people currently residing in the ISS, and NASA's working on the next chapter of U.S. spaceflight, the Artemis mission. Barring any changes under the new administration, NASA aims to return to the surface of the moon in 2027. The last time we were on the moon, space food was developed at Natick in partnership with the Army. In 1966, a film crew from MIT visited the team working on the menu for the first manned flight of Project Apollo.
Hello, I'm John Fitch, MIT science reporter. Today we're at the U.S. Army labs in Natick, Massachusetts, where the National Aeronautics and Space Administration is supporting considerable research into the problems of space feeding.
We have here a variety of the types of foods available for both the Gemini and Apollo missions. Here, for example, are some rehydratables, shrimp cocktail, which could also be a beef pot roast.
Here, Paul Lachance of the Manned Spacecraft Center is showing off a table full of food samples. In this period of menu development, food scientists focused on packaging food into tubes and compressing food into bite-sized cubes. This was thought to be the safest way for astronauts to eat without producing crumbs that could float into delicate equipment. To this day, it's referred to as the cube and tube era of space food.
Cube of some sort, and even a fruitcake.
Mary Klicka, a dietitian who worked at Natick, was part of the team tasked with developing and testing food for the Apollo missions.
Well, of course, NASA gives us the requirements for the menu, and then the length of the mission is quite important to us since it more or less determines what variety we need on the menu. The longer the mission, the more variety you need to assure acceptability and consumption throughout the flight.
So you wouldn't want to use the same menu every day, even if it were nutritious. They'd get bored with it.
That's right.
The scientists at Natick had to consider several different factors in designing their menus.
Texture of the foods, good menu combination. We're as concerned with feeding the astronauts good sounding combinations of foods as the housewife is in feeding her family these.
From Apollo through today, NASA food systems have been run by women. Mary worked for a team that was managed by the legendary Rita Rapp, who continued to develop space food for NASA until shortly before her death in 1989. Rita, an accomplished scientist and one of the first women to attend the St. Louis University School of Medicine, was beloved by the astronauts for the sugar cookies she sent to space. Like Rita, Mary worked to satisfy the astronauts' sweet tooth. As part of her research, she developed a nutrient-fortified fruitcake that could serve as an emergency ration in case a crew were stranded in space. Mary and the Natick team studied the fruitcake carefully to make sure that it would remain acceptable to astronauts after years in storage. Acceptability is NASA speak for whether the astronauts would actually eat it. Today, fruitcake might seem like a strange choice, but it actually has a long history as a compact, nutrient-dense food, carried by soldiers and explorers alike. Fruitcake famously lasts for a long time, making it a natural candidate for the single food contingency ration, one that could sustain astronauts for up to 3 years. And like fruitcake, many of the other preservation techniques NASA relies on to keep food safe in space have been used throughout human history. I spoke to Vickie Kloeris, a former NASA lead scientist, to learn more.
I worked in NASA food systems for about 34 years, and 29 of those years I managed the shuttle food system first and then the International Space Station food system.
These days, NASA develops its menus in-house at 2 labs, one in Houston and one in College Station, Texas, just a short flight away from NASA facilities in Alabama, Louisiana, and Mississippi, and their main launch site in Florida.
Actually, the technologies that NASA uses are very old technologies. When you're here on Earth, you've got refrigerators and freezers to help make your food last longer. You don't have that capability on space station. So in order to make food last a long time, you have to preserve it.
There's a common misconception that all the food in space is freeze-dried, but Vickie explains they actually use a range of preservation methods.
Like on ISS, about 25% of it is freeze-dried. About another 25% is thermostabilized, which is canned, basically, just like your canned products at home, except they're done in pouches to save weight. Probably the most, if you want to say recent, and that's a relative term, recent technology that NASA uses, is they do have some irradiated products. So instead of being made using heat and pressure like canning does, irradiation uses radiation to make it shelf stable.
Safe preservation techniques are especially important in space. A crew member getting food poisoning would be disastrous for a mission. But that's not the only consideration that NASA's food lab has to keep in mind. Long-duration spaceflight brings its own set of problems. If the astronauts don't like the food, if they don't find it acceptable, they can lose dangerous amounts of weight.
The thing with shuttle, because the flights were relatively short, food wasn't all that important to most of the crew members. You know, it's kind of like, it's a camping trip. I'm sure it'll be fine. Well, when they went to Mir and stayed for as long as they did, they came back and said, I really should have paid more attention to what I took.
Since the beginning of the Apollo program, NASA scientists have used the same framework to understand how much the astronaut corps actually enjoys their food.
The station crews are brought in multiple times to the food lab at lunchtime to do food sessions, usually about 4 sessions during their training, so that they get exposure to all the food before they get to orbit. We use a 9-point hedonic scale, and they score it, with 1 being dislike extremely and 9 being like extremely.
This is the same hedonic scale that Mary used when testing her fruitcake. Of course, one of the biggest problems in space menu planning is making sure the astronauts have enough to eat. The ISS receives regular unmanned supply shipments. But what happens if something goes awry? In 2004, a crew found out the hard way when the flight of a supply ship was delayed for several months.
And so when we heard there was going to be this delay, we knew the food supply was going to be tight. So we had the crew members on orbit go inventory.
But when the crew looked in their backup supply, many of the boxes weren't full.
Previous crew members had, unbeknownst to us, gone and cherry-picked some things out of those containers. I mean, there was a lot of things in the paper about, they're going to run out of food. They might have to pull the crew off the station because they don't have food. Well, the truth of the matter is they were going to run out of water, too. So the program realized we need to up our reserves and make sure that we have enough. Really, that's a good thing, because if you look at Sonny and Butch getting stuck up there, people were like,
are they going to have enough food?
And I'm like, that's not what they have to worry about. They've got the food. What they're going to be worried about is clothing. They don't have a way to wash clothes up there, and they weren't planning to be there all that time.
In case you missed it, Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams are the astronauts currently stuck on the ISS, though NASA may prefer we say their mission has been extended. What was scheduled to be an 8-day mission will now stretch to at least 9 months. As of March 9th, 2025, they are scheduled to return to Earth in a matter of days. To be clear, they still have plenty of food to eat. There's no need to break into an emergency fruitcake supply. Even so, I still had to ask, do you think there could be a future for fruitcake in the space program?
I mean, I don't see why it couldn't be possible.
When we come back, we'll explore the ways food can create community even in the most barren environments. But first, love listening to Gravy? Excited to read SFA's weekly newsletter? Want to spend the weekend with curious eaters from across the South and beyond, lapping up engaging talks and delectable bites? Then join us for SFA's Fall Symposium in Birmingham, Alabama. We'll gather October 25th and 26th to weave together engaging talks, great food, compelling films, and thought-provoking conversations focused on the Southern city. Together, we'll consider the ways the urban South shapes how we eat, how we think about ourselves, and how we understand this place we call home. Tickets go on sale in August. Hope to see you in the ham.
I wanted to further understand the context for using fruitcake as an emergency ration. So next, I headed to the National Air and Space Museum to talk to an expert in space food artifacts, both their scientific importance and their broader cultural meaning. They even still have samples of the Apollo fruitcake in their archive.
I'm Dr. Jennifer Levasseur. I am a museum curator at the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum.
So what does Jennifer think about Mary's fruitcake?
I've always seen it in terms of certainly human spaceflight of the 1960s as probably the most culturally obvious thing to have on spaceflight. The way in which it's made, its sticky texture, the fact that it clumps together, the fact that it has multiple components to it that are flavorful. It covers a lot of bases in a single bite. And that's the trick with most space food, is finding a way to make bite-sized pieces, because nobody wants things to crumble.
The food scientists working for NASA certainly thought so. They sent nutritionally fortified fruitcake on Apollo 17, and even included it on proposed menus for the Apollo-Soyuz project and the early days of the shuttle program. NASA even included emergency contingency rations of Mary's fruitcake on the short-lived space station Skylab, where the crew got special permission to break into their fruitcake supply as a Christmas treat in 1973. Jennifer argues that these types of gatherings are of crucial importance to mission success.
It's a misunderstood, I suppose, part of astronaut life is not everything has to be different just because it's going to space. It really should be something familiar, because that's really important to the psychological well-being of astronauts, is that they carry with them something of home. One of the major stories we want to tell about life on the International Space Station, it would be basically to be able to have the kitchen table. So their own table then becomes that space where they share meals. And you can tell if you ever get a chance to look up images of them using that space, they're all smiling so big. And you can tell it's about that interaction with each other, that sharing of the experience, that sharing of the food.
And just like when we treat ourselves to a favorite meal when we're having a hard time, astronauts look forward to resupply missions and holiday meals as a chance to break up the rhythm of their work.
Those are those moments that are like the treats that we give ourselves with food on Earth. And astronauts are working 6.5 days a week, pretty much nonstop. They're not taking lots of breaks to do much other than their jobs. And so having those moments is critical.
So could fruitcake continue to serve a purpose as a special treat in space?
Strangely enough, I could see some concept like fruitcake coming back. I think because it is compiled of so many different components that if we could find the right formulation of the right things and put it in something that is similar to fruitcake, I could see a kind of revival in a way of that concept.
After I spoke with Jennifer, I kept thinking about the image of the kitchen table on the International Space Station, a place where astronauts from all over the world have shared meals. I wanted to speak to someone who had actually sat at that table.
I'm Cady Coleman. I'm a former NASA astronaut.
A native of Charleston, South Carolina, Cady joined the astronaut corps in 1992 and is the veteran of 2 shuttle missions and a 6-month stint on the ISS. In her memoir, Cady describes herself as a scientist, a musician, and a mom. Through our whole interview, Cady stressed the importance of food to the success of the mission.
There's a certain amount of comfort in food. And I found the end of my mission was pretty stressful because we just had a lot going on. The shuttle arrived, and it's like having, everybody in your family come for Thanksgiving and not leave for a week and a half, right? And then we actually had to undock during that time. So it was a really frenetic time. And I found that what I ate just went back to sort of the comfort food, the stuff that just felt nice. I kind of didn't want anything that was like, okay, I'll eat that. It just really wanted my sort of like, beef stroganoff, macaroni and cheese, fiesta chicken.
I asked Cady about the incident in 2004 where the crew on the ISS found that their pantry was not as well stocked as they expected.
I mean, that would be like, basically, it's like when you're eating a carton of ice cream and mind all the pieces of chocolate out of that. The next person would be like, well, but, and then nutrition people would be saying, hey, is that next person going to be able to have enough to eat nutritionally, right? And that's why, we called it the food czar. Being the food czar meant that you had to tell people no, right? No, you cannot open that new package. It's not time and you can't even get anything out of it.
So how did Cady become the food czar on the ISS?
I think food was actually a pretty good assignment for me. And I did volunteer for it. If I went back to space and somebody said, Cady, would you take care of the food? I would at least want to say no. Because everybody has extra jobs, and food took an unbelievable amount of time.
Everybody takes extra assignments on the space station. If you were what Cady nicknamed the food czar, that meant you had to be in charge of inventorying all these food boxes, opening up all the separate elements and putting them where they needed to go. You see, the food supply is separated into 3 categories, like the standard menu food, which everyone shares. Then there was the crew preference food, which were special menu items that each astronaut was particularly fond of. They got to have extra of those. Finally, there were off-menu items, typically consumer packaged goods with a long shelf life that the astronauts got to bring with NASA approval. Sometimes being the food czar meant you had to tell your colleagues no, they couldn't have any more tomato soup, they needed to eat the mushroom soup instead. All of this might sound particularly familiar to any mom who's ever had to unpack from a trip to the grocery store. It made Cady long for more futuristic technology.
On Star Trek, you just tell the machine what you want and it does it, right? And having that kind of mechanism, would actually be pretty attractive up there.
To this day, the ISS is split into a Russian and a US segment. The latter houses astronauts from space agencies all over the world. NASA provides food for the US segment, and Roscosmos, the Russian space agency, provides the cosmonauts food. Trading food between the crews is common, though, and it leads to some transactions that you may remember from your school lunchroom.
Well, I just think it's interesting how important food was to people. I myself used it as a currency, so to speak. in various forms, where I like meat, I eat meat, but our Russian crewmates really loved meat. And so we would have 3 steaks every 9 days. And I just didn't really care about mine so much. I did like Russian borscht, but they really like steak. And so I would trade steak for borscht.
Cady understood that there was power in the way the food was divided, and that her decisions could directly affect the success of her crew's assignment.
I did actually spend a lot of time on food and thinking about it, and thinking about, just because I was in charge of food, just sort of being sensitive to how people seem. And there are other flights where it was a little more mechanical, I think. Like, this makes sense, this is what we're going to do. And there was like fighting over food. I was not a witness, but I understand that food could be something that it's just like the last straw when somebody's had a bad day, and then their steak isn't there, and words were exchanged and things like that.
Something that was echoed by everyone I spoke to for this piece, Vickie, Jennifer, and Cady alike, was the importance of gathering to share food on orbit. Space station crews aren't selected for the compatibility of their personalities. They're chosen for the skills they bring to the table. Knitting a diverse group together into a team takes more than a shared scientific mission. It also requires connecting with each other as people.
We had a number of tough things happening on our expedition. One of our crew members lost their mom. Someone else had an accident in their family. There's just a lot going on. And I think that that's when food and gathering are just really important.
When I asked Cady if she thought there could be a future for fruitcake in space, her answer really surprised me. Cady argues that fruitcake is still there, on orbit, in the form of calorie-dense fruit and nut bars, like the kind you could walk into any grocery store and buy. These food bars are a common meal for astronauts when they're about to put on their spacesuits and leave the station for repairs. These trips are called EVAs, extravehicular activity, and they are some of the most difficult work that astronauts have to accomplish. Food bars act as a quick snack to eat when their minds are focused on a delicate or dangerous mission.
I mean, when it comes right down to it, you could do 100% food bars. And if somebody said, okay, if you'll eat 100% food bars, you can go to Mars, I'd be like, okay, I don't even care. They could be liver. Okay, I'll eat them.
It's a reminder that at heart, astronauts are incredibly driven. To advance science, yes, but also to explore. In the service of that drive, they're willing to endure discomfort that might be unimaginable to many of us. Think about it. They can be separated from their families for months, living in an environment where a loss of pressure could be catastrophic. They eat all their meals from packets while bumping shoulders with crewmates they didn't choose, unable to shower or even use the bathroom normally.
I mean, people will live through a lot. And at the same time, I think that all the things that you can do to make people feel more human and less kind of beat up, whether it's communication that's seamless with their family, making food seamless, making being able to be clean seamless. So the more things that are human that you can make seamless, and I think that even though food bars would still be, everyone would survive, I think they'd feel a little less human.
So I've pulled the fruitcake from the oven, and it's still pretty warm, but I'm gonna unmold it, and we're gonna try a slice. It looks pretty classic, just how you'd expect a fruitcake from the 1960s to look. It's got little bits of glacéed cherry and candied pineapple. And it's good. It's genuinely very good. I don't know why I'm acting surprised, because I really like fruitcake. In 1982, Mary Klicka published a technical report summarizing her life's work, as well as the work of all the people in the NASA food labs. She concluded, quote, "The type and variety of the food system was recognized by NASA as foremost among the life conditions influencing behavior." When Mary developed this fruitcake as an emergency ration, she did so with so much care for the well-being of the astronauts.
We're as concerned with feeding the astronauts good-sounding combinations of foods as the housewife is in feeding her family.
It's part of this enormous effort to make space not just a workplace, but also a home. And choosing, preparing, and organizing the food we often think of as domestic work is at the very heart of that labor. It's the labor that makes us feel human, even in space.
Bronwen Wyatt is a baker and writer in New Orleans. Subscribe to her Bayou Saint newsletter at Substack. Subscribers enjoy recipes, reflections, and interviews on subjects as vital as the comforting absurdity of tater tot quiche and as tempting as chocolate prune sheet cake. We thank Wendell Patrick for Gravy's theme music. We also owe a huge thank you to Clay Jones and Broadcast Studios here in Oxford, Mississippi for recording and mixing Gravy. Managing editor for Gravy and all other SFA media is Sarah Camp Milam. Olivia Terenzio is our podcast editor. Fact-checking comes courtesy of Lisa Pollock. Mary Beth Lassiter is our publisher. Visit us at southernfoodways.org to learn more about our work. While you're there, watch a film, listen to an oral history, read an article from our sister publication, Gravy Quarterly, or make a donation. Because your dollars fund our work and help us make more gravy. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a rating or review. And spread the word. Tell a friend, because there is plenty of gravy to go around.